All right, what is up, Notre Dame fans? We are here outside of Notre Dame Stadium on March 22nd, 2023. Todd Burlage, Tyler Horka. First day of Notre Dame spring practice. It's crazy. It feels like we just finished the Gator Bowl 2 weeks ago. Somehow it's already been 3 months, but exciting times here, getting ready for Marcus Freeman's second season as the Notre Dame head football coach. Plenty to talk about today, going forward. We'll have coverage throughout this month leading up to April 22nd's Blue Gold game. But Todd, let's start right from the start. When we walked into the Irish Athletic Center this morning, we saw a familiar sight. The team lined up, going through stretching drills, and if there's ever a day that it's kind of interesting to watch that, it's the first day because you can kind of learn a little something about the way guys are lined up. What did you see?
Yeah, I think you can find a little bit of a leadership hierarchy in who's running the calisthenics line, and that has held true for years, so that's always the first thing I like to look at. And I made a note of some of the guys. It's a lot of graduate students. I better get my readers on here.
Go ahead, man.
Chris TYREE was in there. Cam Hart, which we didn't even know if he would practice, but he was in that front line. Clarence Lewis, Jack Kaiser, Matt Salerno, Nana Osafa-Mensah, a few more here. Zeke Correll, Howard Cross III, Michael Vinson, Joe Alt, Jaden Thomas, Mitchell Evans, and Riley Mills. So typically the captains come out of this group. I'm sorry, J.D. Bertrand as well, the only returning captain from last year. Typically your captains and your SWAT team leaders come from this group, so we'll have to track that as we go.
I think one of the interesting names there, obviously a lot of older guys, like you said, a lot of team captain types that have been here a little while and stepped up. But I know Jaden Thomas is a junior, but Marcus Freeman just talked about him in his press conference, and there's a lot of graduate student guys there. Jaden Thomas is only a junior. I saw him today. He looks bulked up. He looks big. He's always been a pretty big wide receiver. I think ESPN actually just mistook him for a tight end, actually. He's very much a wide receiver, but if there's a name that kind of pops out to you as interesting, that's the one for me. Who is it for you?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to stick with the wide receiver room. I thought Tobias Merriweather looked very good, too. They ran one drill where all four quarterbacks threw at the same time. You had one tight end, which was Evans, and then Merriweather, Jaden Thomas, and Colsey. Those were the three wide receivers. So those guys look to be the early favorites, those four, to be starters. Obviously, Evans wouldn't come as a big surprise, but that wide receiver room is a little bit in flux. So that was a little bit of a tidbit that I took away, the guys that are probably going to be the front runners for that wide receiver group.
Yeah, you always try to read a little bit into what you see at these practices, and probably too much, you're right. But I saw the same thing. I saw Tobias Merriweather, who's now wearing number 5, by the way. He changed from 15 to 5. So you have those four quarterbacks lined up, and they're all throwing to the targets that you mentioned. And if you assume that Sam Hartman, who we'll get to in a little bit, I spent a lot of my day watching Sam Hartman. If you assume he's going to be quarterback number 1 for Notre Dame, and it might take 5 months for Marcus Freeman to come out and say that, but we assume that's where it's getting to. He was throwing to Tobias Merriweather on that first route most of the times that they went through. They would kind of – so you have these quarterbacks, and they're throwing to 4 different targets like Todd said, and they're all running 4 different routes, obviously. So every time that Sam Hartman stepped up to throw first, he threw to Tobias Merriweather. So I'm not saying Tobias Merriweather is your wide receiver number 1, but as Todd said, and as I kind of saw, he could be in the conversation. Did you notice, I think that 5th period was probably the one that we could glean the most from the Notre Dame offense. What else did you kind of see in that period?
I did notice that, as you mentioned, Hartman throwing to Merriweather, those were the downfield routes. You had some intermediate stuff, and then some dunk-off stuff. That was an interesting combination, watching those two work together throughout that drill. I did take a lot away from that drill, including what you mentioned as well. Jaden Thomas is a big dude. That's it. When you start to look at this wide receiver group and you want to compare it to last year's, man, they have a lot more size than what we saw last year for sure.
And I think that's something that obviously Chancey Stuckey is going for in recruiting, because it's not just Caleb Smith coming in for Virginia Tech, who's also a very big guy, or Jaden Thomas, who's a big guy. I was looking at Rico Flores today, the wide receiver out of California, true freshman, and I was like, whoa, man. I mean, this guy's legs are like tree trunks, and you don't usually see that from early enrollee freshmen, especially at the wide receiver position.
Right.
Why did it take Tobias Merriweather so long to kind of get going last season? It's because he was a little smaller and he had some bulking up to do. But Rico Flores looks like he could play right away. Braylon James had a very impressive physical stature to him, and so did Jaden Greathouse as well. I was a little surprised. I thought Jaden Greathouse would be the one that kind of stuck out to me the most among those three. to me it was Flores, and I saw him make a couple catches in that period that we watched where they were throwing with the quarterbacks. And Marcus Freeman in his press conference, he kind of gave a little smile and he said, "I saw the freshman wide receivers make some plays today." Just how much could that change this offense if those guys are as advertised?
Well, it's been such a grab bag, the wide receivers, and now it looks like we went from grab bag, are these guys ever going to perform when we're talking about the veterans from last year, to man, this could be a very deep unit, and they're going to make each other better, they're going to push each other, and who emerges we'll have to wait and see. Will there be any room for these freshmen to step right in? Time will tell.
History says no.
Yeah, history says no. But at the same time, it's not a bad thing to work behind some of these fine. It just looks like a unit that's going to take big strides this year.
Yeah, I think so as well. Another big storyline, obviously, we're seeing some of these coaches for the first time. GINO GUIDUGLI was working with the quarterbacks. He's the new Notre Dame quarterbacks coach. Marcus Freeman spent some time in his press conference today talking about that dynamic too, and I actually asked that question. I think it's kind of interesting that Notre Dame is going to have a guy that can stay right by them, and Tommy Rees did that, but now you have Gerad Parker who can watch the entire offense, and I saw from that first 5-minute period where we mentioned where the quarterbacks were throwing a bunch of different targets, Gerad Parker was standing in the middle of the field, and if Mitchell Evans ran a route or Holden Stays ran a route that he didn't like, he was right there to tell him, hey, Tommy Rees didn't get to do a whole lot of that last year because he was way back with the quarterbacks and just working with those guys. Now you got GUIDUGLI doing that. You have Parker watching the whole entire operation. Parker, GUIDUGLI, Marty Biaggi, the new special teams coach, Joe Rudolph, the new offensive line coach. Did you see anything out of those guys today?
GUIDUGLI, I think that is an advantage, and you touched on it a little bit. It's quarterbacks only, and Marcus Freeman talked about during his press conference, because he wants the new quarterback's coach to harp on decisions. Yeah. He wants to see good decisions, and he thinks having that more hands-on approach to coaching and always be around this guy will help groom those guys in that way.
Yeah, and then just to touch on another one of those guys, I thought Joe Rudolph coming in from Virginia Tech, obviously the 1 year, but most people know him from Wisconsin, another offensive line university school, if you will. I don't think Notre Dame is, I don't want to say they're not missing much with Harry Hiestand leaving, because obviously he's kind of the guru. Everyone was so excited when he came back from that 1 year. But I saw a lot of hands-on work with Joe Rudolph working with the offensive line. It seems like he knows these guys' names already. Obviously, everyone knows Joe Alt, Blake Fisher, but he was pointing out to some other guys, the Zeke Carrells of the world, Andrew Kristofic, some of these other guys, and say, hey, Andrew, you need to do this a little bit better on this rep. You need to do that. And, I mean, those are all starters right there, but you're talking about second teamers. Joe Rudolph was like, hey, you need to do this and you need to do that. So, that'll pretty much wrap us up. I know there's a lot of other kind of roster management decisions that we'll have covered for you at blueandgold.com. Marcus Freeman rolled through a lot of those. But I guess we'll end with this. Obviously, the guys in the injury pit, the pit, if you'll call it, I think one of the most reassuring things for Notre Dame fans from that perspective was Jadarian Price. Marcus Freeman just said in his press conference that the sophomore running back seems to be getting closer to football activities. And Todd, that might have been why we saw Chris TYREE. Here's another nugget for you guys. Yeah, right. Working with the wide receivers, because you already have Logan Diggs, you have Audric Estime. If Jadarian Price comes back and is a really good ball player for this team this year, I think he slots in as your number 3 running back, and you probably see TYREE, like you saw today, play more wide receiver.
And you have to get Chris TYREE on the field, and I think the coaches recognize that. Obviously, Marcus Freeman said TYREE is perfectly well equipped to play wide receiver just as much as he is running back. Very versatile player. That'll be interesting to see, because you have to get the ball in his hands. I don't think Notre Dame has done a real good job of that to this point in his career. Maybe some of that lies on him, play calling, whatever you want to call it. But Chris TYREE needs to be a weapon in this offense.
Yeah, some of his touches were so predictable last year. He was on the field. I mean, he averaged the least amount of yards per reception of Diggs and Estime.
It's hard to believe in it.
And that just shouldn't be the case, because I think Estime and Diggs would be the first to tell you that TYREE is probably the most athletic and the most – if you want the ball in the open field in someone's hands, of those 3, probably want it to be TYREE, right. And it just shouldn't have been the case that he was averaging the least yards per reception. So, like I said, go to blueandgold.com. We're going to have spring ball covered for you for the next month. We'll be back here on Saturday, I think, is another open practice, and we'll have another post-practice report. But until then, like I said, I'm Tyler Horka. This is Todd Burlage. Go to blueandgold.com. We're going to have a ton up there for you guys.